everybody, and welcome to another week 4. I'm going to ask all of our panelists and chat moderators to make sure that you're muted so that we won't have any feedback. Thank you guys for joining us. I can't believe how far we've come. We're week 4 of 6, and we're going to get right into chapter 8 and 9. I love this week because we're talking about motivation to do, not just to learn, and also habit forming, which I think is just so crucial to our practice. So we're going to go ahead and have our introductions, and we're going to go ahead. I'm going to start with what I can see on my side, and I'm going to start with Aaron. Hey, remember everyone, tell everyone where you're from, your name, of course, and a little bit of your work. All right, so we're going to start with Aaron.
Thanks, Nicole, and welcome everyone. And it's really great to be back. I was just saying to the group that I was super keen to wake up this morning for today's book club. I'm calling in from Vancouver, Canada. We actually have a little bit of sunshine today, which is nice. I've been in the learning space for about 25 years. I did about 13 years of teaching English in the classroom at the university level in Canada and overseas. And then in 2012, I moved over into like learning management systems and developing courses and technology. And now I'm working on learning design, so really big picture stuff, which I really love. So this book is perfect. I'm really glad to be here. So hi, everyone.
Thank you so much. All right, next we're going to go to Reba.
Oh, now. Okay. Hi, I'm Reba. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I'm new to instructional design. I transitioned from being a teacher years ago. I love teaching, but I saw there was something else out there for me since I was already training teachers and developing content. So I'm currently an educational consultant and a webinar trainer for educational communities. So I do some freelance work in instructional design with small nonprofits and a few teacher cohorts. I added instructional design to my career because I felt that it was a perfect companion to what I was already doing as a consultant, and instructional design made a perfect pair. And I'm glad to be here. See you guys in chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, next we're going to go to Dr. Cropper.
Yes, I'm Dr. Max H. Cropper, and I have over 40 years experience doing instructional design. I have a master's and a doctorate, and I've worked for a lot of organizations, government, military, profit, nonprofit, and there's not a lot of good training out there. So I studied and worked with Dr. M. David Merrill, who's one of the top instructional design theorists in the world, and he's co-facilitated workshops with me. And I'm trying to share, promote and teach his first principles of instruction. And so I see this as an opportunity to see how instructional strategy design can be married with learning design, because they're very closely related. Anyway, I'm in eastern Utah. I grew up in Utah, and so while I worked in the DC area for about 6 years, I've back in Utah now.
Thank you. And I know we're not starting the discussion yet, but I do love what you said, Dr. Cropper, about there just not being enough good training. We are responsible for the training, and so many times in our roles, we don't get an opportunity. We have to seek it out a lot of times on our own to get good training. So being able to train the trainer is important, and that's why I'm so glad that you're here with such a wealth of experience. We're going to go to Linda.
Hey, everybody. I'm Linda. I'm relatively new in instructional design, but not to learning. I home educated my passel of children for many years, close to 20, until the ones that hadn't graduated yet went to public school. And I started pursuing instructional design. I am about to finish up my master's at George Mason University, where I also have a graduate research assistant position, working on a team to create a new minor in ethics and artificial intelligence, and am doing some contract work with a company helping to customize their diversity, equity, and inclusion courses. And I'm in Northern Virginia.
Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, next we're going to go to Kenya.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here today with you all. I've been tuning in since the beginning, so it's fun to discuss chapters 8 and 9 with you. I'm dialing in from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It is cold and gloomy outside today. Uh, and my background is in marketing. I started out in nonprofits and did a little bit of corporate. Then I kind of went on my own and started doing freelancing. So, freelance writing. So, a little bit of journalism, a little bit of copywriting. And then I kind of took a leap and spent about 8 years teaching English as a second language abroad in South Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Colombia, as well as online. I've been back for about a year and a half now, and was in corporate marketing, but started to ask myself, what other careers are out there that might be more in alignment with what I want to do? And then magically, I discovered instructional design. So I'm here and learning a lot and just, again, excited to be a part of the conversation.
One of the things I love, hands down, this is one of my favorite parts of book club, is just hearing how everyone's path kind of intersects. And we use that, right, to enhance our own training. So thank you for that. That was amazing. All right. And then Dixon. Some of you guys may know Dixon from being a chat moderator before. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Dixon.
Hello, everyone. Like Nicole said, I'm Dixon Morande. I'm calling from Kenya, and I'm relatively new to the space of instructional design. So currently, I'm working with a startup, basically in charge of developing instructional material and also managing the onboarding process of new customers. Really, really happy to be here, and like I told you, Nicole, so happy that you put this together.
All right. And I just have to point out this irony that we have someone from Kenya and we have someone named Kenya on the panel. So I don't know what that means for today, but I think it's promising. All right. So let's go ahead and get right into our discussion of chapter 8. All right. So we're going to go ahead. Let me go ahead and go back a week 4. It is week 4. Okay. So one question. It says, in these activities, you know what? I don't want to start there. I'm going to be honest. I was like, no, it's like, okay, we're going to start here. All right. Back. I'm not scattered anymore, folks. Okay. So one of the things, I got some messages from people that said that, they haven't really read it yet, but they just discovered it and they're here now. So today you're going to see that I give a little bit more background before some of the discussions. There's a lot of talk of elephants and writers. And if I just kind of hit into that and you're like, I didn't read the book, or I'm about to read the book, I don't want you to feel like, well, why was I here? So I am going to give some background today. So there's this idea of the elephant and the writer, right? Usually the writer is the one that's in control. That is our brain that's more rational. We're going to really take learning activities seriously. We're going to put them into practice. But then there's the writer, right? And you're dealing with an elephant, you're dealing with an animal that kind of needs to be trained. And though the elephant can be steered, eventually the elephant's going to do what? Its own thing, right? It'll ride off, it'll go into its path. And Julie in her book talks about when we're looking at learning or habits or learning how to do something new, putting something new into place, a lot of times our elephant takes over, right? No matter how interesting the topic may be or how important the topic may be, if it doesn't appeal to our senses, our need to be able to solve issues, if it doesn't appeal to the things that we really care about, right? If it doesn't really appeal to the things that we really care about, we're going to get distracted. The elephant gets distracted. So we're going to appeal to that elephant to really increase motivation. So when we say elephant and writer, that's what we're talking about. So this quote says, in these activities, the elephant is being asked to sacrifice in the present for some future gain. But the elephant is only really persuaded by what's happening now and by the experience of immediate consequences. The writer knows there's an association with the future consequence, but whatever the future consequence is, it's too abstract to influence the elephant. So in the book, Julie kind of talks about saving for retirement, right? The immediate consequence is that you don't have enough money, but we know long term is that you're going to be okay in the future. And she talks about how people know certain things are bad for them, And so it's not an issue of not having knowledge or skills. They have the knowledge of skill and skills. But what is it in our design that can help them go from just understanding whatever they need to understand to actually doing it? She also talks about losing weight. You know that eating certain foods and all of those things won't give you to your goal necessarily. But the instant gratification that the elephant sees is that donut tastes really good, right? So when it comes to our actual practice, here are the questions. And it says number 3 and number 4, but we're going to roll with it, okay? How do we make future consequences more concrete for the elephant? Again, it's this idea that saying, hey, you need to do this practice at your job, or you're not going to get some benefit. If it's not an immediate consequence or something immediate that the learner needs to know, they're probably going to throw it out because they can't connect to it. So for us as designers, how do we make future consequences more concrete for the elephant in our design when we have a training when there's simply not an immediate consequence, right? And then there's number 4. Can we shift people from being an elephant to a writer? Should that even be a goal, right? Julie talks about being an elephant. That's kind of natural to us in our brain to look at the shiny thing or the distracting thing. So should we even have a goal to change them to writer? So our panelists, I know that was a long introduction, but I wanted to make sure all our new people felt like you were clued in. You could answer one or both or all of them. So anyone want to chime in for that first one?
I'll chime in really quickly. Just, as you were going through the questions, I think providing, and helping people gain the motivation, I think providing them with a vision, right? So when you're teaching them, when you're laying out what the course is, having examples of what the end result could look like, either throughout or in the very beginning, is really helpful, because it's kind of like in life, when you have a vision, you know where you're going, as opposed to when you don't, you're just kind of reacting to life or reacting to things. And so helping the learner get that clear vision or that example from the beginning is really useful.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Kenya said, I think that's correct. And recently, I was consulting with a certain company, and we were designing for. So in Kenya, we have motorcycles that can be used as public transport, and so the idea is, how do you then design for those people to reduce obstructions, to abide by the regulation put in place by the government, and also be able to manage their finances well. One of the things that we did within the program was to have them paint a picture of a future they'd wish to live. And with that concrete picture in their mind, we were like, so how do you move from where you are towards that? Because we are talking about people who earn money on the daily basis, so making it challenging to actually save. So the idea was, okay, so what do you want? You want to build a house, right? So can you try to describe that house as concrete as possible to the finite details? And once you do that, and we realized that saving became easier for them, in terms of, they knew that this is what I'm working towards, and they could easily put savings towards that particular project. And so far we are seeing some good results. It's our second year into the project, and we're really getting some really good results from the participants from the training.
I really enjoyed hearing that, because I think, Kenya, what you talk about when you talk about kind of creating that map, so many times training is one more thing I have to do. It's an interruption to my day, and no matter
Yeah.
how much I need the information, I just right. This is my immediate thing I need to do. This deadline, this email, and yes, I need to know how to do this process, but I just can't. So I love that idea of the framing, right? Framing it to see what are the benefits. And Dixon, that was an amazing example. And I love not just the example, which I think is just beautifully designed. And I love the context of it, especially like the context of what's happening in Kenya. But I also love knowing that there's results. Like you are able to say, no, the learners are actually getting results from this. And it's funny because I don't see the training, but as soon as I heard it, I was like, I need to see that training now. Like that just seems, I'm interested already just by hearing it. So I can't imagine how the learners are experiencing it. Thank you for that. Does anybody else want to chime in?
I just,
Yeah,
I
Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly share in preparation for this for this discussion a meme that I saw. So as a which way?
Hold
As
on.
a writer,
1 second. Go ahead.
can you see that? Okay, I'll read it. So,
Okay.
as a writer, not writer, as a writer, the meme says all you need is motivation, and then the bottom says false. You need fear and an approaching deadline, and it it makes it so real because writers are known as kind of procrastinating till the very last minute, and then we knock it out. But it really people really have to see the reason why this affects me and why I really need to learn. So that's another part about it, which the book talks about in earlier chapters, are just like the what motivates people. They touched on that earlier, but
Yeah, I think that's super important, Kenya. And I
sorry.
think oh, don't apologize. This is a conversation. This is going to happen. All right. That was perfect. We needed to hear that, especially giving it another context. So I think that was a really good point. Aaron and Dr. Crawford also had something to say. You're muted, Aaron.
I'm so excited, started talking. I wanted to take off of what Dixon said, like follow that line along, because I love the idea of, when I think of a lot of engagement, and when people talk about learning and engagement, often they think about gamification, but what Dixon is talking about is engagement. You're building that engagement and the connection between the learner and themselves in the future. And that is like about as motivating as it gets. Like I love that so much. And I think that we often, as designers, and a lot of the training, we were talking about earlier, like there's not a lot of good training out there, and we're here to make it better. And how do we do that? And I think it's knowing the audience and getting the audience, the learners, to connect to their future beyond the actual training in itself sometimes, right? Like, so if we're doing on the job training, it's not just what that learner or that person is going to do on the job, but how excelling on that job makes their life better and their community and their relationships with their people. And so going a little bit beyond that. So I think that's really interesting. And I just want to throw in one more thing, and that's sort of going from the big picture, which we're looking at here, to the small picture and the consequences is, scenario-based learning. When I've seen, you've got a challenge and you have to make these choices. And if it's done well, it is so good because you feel the sting of creating, where you're like, whoa, I'm really going in the wrong direction here. And I feel it. I've done really good scenario-based training. And I'm like, wow, okay, now I feel that I don't want to make that decision anymore. And I'm going to go back. And it's high risk decision making in a low risk situation. And I think that's it's hard. It's big job to do scenario-based training, but you get that feeling and that motivation when you do it. So yeah.
If I may, before you go, Dr. Cropper, I just wanted to kind of hone in on that high risk decision making in a low risk environment. I think that is so important. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had to do, and this is not a sponsored video, but Cognito training. But Cognito, I really love Cognito. So they really work with healthcare, but how they have it is they have it for students or for patients, and you have a situation where you're talking to like a student or a patient in crisis, and you have to pick the answer, and they have these responses, and it's an animated character that's actually speaking to you, and it's very realistic. And in the moment you feel like, oh my gosh, I've made the student feel so bad. And Julie also talks about immediate feedback. And so with Cognito training, it tells you like, here's why this didn't work, or this, you're actually getting a negative response. So it says, do you want to kind of backtrack? And it has a digital coach. And I feel like when I leave that training, when I've been in those situations, I'm like, oh, wait, this may actually make them feel this way. Let me reroute. It's much better than reading a block of text saying which type of responses work and which ones don't work, just actually being in that scenario. So yes, Dr. Crawford.
Yes, so I'm a big proponent of Merrill's first principles of instruction, and he calls it task-centered, but I say, well, it's task-centered, problem-centered, scenario-based, but what I think of is what we're moving towards is having the learner own the problem. In other words, we're transitioning from us, the instructor, owning the problem to the learner owning the problem and the solution. Yet we still can provide instruction and guidance and coaching. And so the number one, if you really want to achieve performance, you provide coaching, to the person that's struggling, but they still own the problem, but you help them. And then like uh, Dixon and and Ken were saying, and all of you, they need to also acknowledge, what result they're working, what is the accomplishment they're working towards, and then how can they do that, and how can you coach them? And and I keep thinking of the 70-20-10 rule or guideline, that 10% is the training event, 20% is the coaching and the doing, and then 70% is the doing. And and so I think I think that's where there are a lot of things to help with motivation, but getting the learner to own that whole trajectory, I think that's the key.
I I totally agree with you, Dr. Cropper, and that owning the problem and well, owning the solution as well, problem and the solution. That is really also what sets apart adult learning. I know that we have a lot of transitioning teachers here. I was a transition teacher, and Julie really talks about the whole point of increasing motivation is not to control the learner, right? We have no control. And I think when I think about transitioning teachers, and I always want to acknowledge that's not people's only path to this. And I know that I'm just speaking from experience. But when you're talking about talking to employers or designing, even though there has been in K through 12 this idea of student focused learning, and there's ways to do that, and there's teachers that do that masterfully, the environment in K through 12 is about control. There's discipline. You confiscate cell phones, if they're not learning. You call parents. You have grades. You meet with the principal. So there's an environment, and they're younger, right? So there's an environment of control. And I think even if somebody has not transitioned from K through 12, how we've all experienced learning in our own lives is through an environment where control was a big part of it. And I think the reason why so much training is so static and it's not really great is because we don't design with trusting the learner in mind. We actually don't trust the learner all the way yet. And they're adults. And that is directly what all the adult learning theories are trying to tell us, right? So if they're owning the problem, you're basically telling them that they're smart and they're capable. A couple chapters back, Julie talked about that professor that says, I want them at the end of this to feel like they've invented calculus, you know? And I think when adults realize, oh, they respect my time, they respect my intelligence, I'm a part of this solution, then they're going to have a lot more buy-in from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it also, I wanted to touch back on some points I think it was that Aaron made as well. Just and it also kind of follows up to your what you were just saying, Nicole, is just how helping the learner take control and helping them feel good about their learning process. Is the self-efficacy part. I think when we do demonstrate the scenario-based learning, people can sometimes see themselves in that situation and then see how that problem is worked out and then feel like, oh, okay, they can see like the answer or see like that's a mistake that I make. But if this is an easy fix to it, then that presents the motivation and starts their wheels turning and opening up that possibility if they were closed to like this is how this process can work or how I can learn or how I can improve and be better.
Yeah, that self-efficacy is super important. Does anybody else want to chime in for this part? All right. Well, we do have another question for chapter 8. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And you guys who are watching are having such amazing conversations. We're seeing some of them pop up on the screen, and you guys are adding to our ideas. So keep them coming. All right. So I do want to have a quick reminder that for week 6, so it's week after next, author Julie Dirksen will be with us. We only have one chapter to read that day. So you'll have a little bit of time on that chapter. and then the rest of it will kind of just be questions for Julie, right? So our chat moderators are going to put a link throughout the entire time today for you to sign up for an email sign up so you guys can know when that sign up is live. If you've already done email sign up with me before, you don't need to do that again because I already have your emails. But if you've never done email sign up with me before, when that is put in the link, in the chat, you can go ahead and just put your email there. You guys will be some of the first ones. Right now, it's an open secret. I haven't posted it really on my LinkedIn. I'm waiting to do that. I'm trying to be strategic about it all. So when you put your email in there, you guys will be some of the first ones. And I'll tell you guys next Saturday how you can actually submit your own questions for Julie. All right. So we're going to go ahead and move on. All right. So now this is number 1 and 2. Okay, so chapter 8, we're going to go ahead and finish up with chapter 8. So I'm interested in hearing from the panel and people that are watching as well. What are some projects that you've worked on or are working on? Dixon kind of already started us off, where the action is now, but the consequence is later. How could that be solved to appeal to the elephant that will most likely only change behavior when the consequence is immediate? So I'm going to reframe that question because there's a lot of words there, right? So sometimes we have projects where there is no immediate consequence. Like you're training them for a future scenario, like point blank period, right? So what do you do in those cases to kind of help them? We kind of touched on this already. So, if you have new ideas, we can add that to the conversation. Also, do you have an example of a learning design, yours or someone else's, where there is an element of immediacy that motivates people to do? For those who haven't read the book, who just found us, last week was kind of motivation to learn, right? Like how to have motivation to learn. And you can have all the knowledge, as we know, right? Like she said, smoking is bad, but people know that and they still will smoke, right? So what is the motivation to do? So tell me, what was the project? And if it was your own, how did you design for it? So number 2, it doesn't have to be your own project. Think about a project where you were like, no, there was an immediate consequence and it helped motivate. And because our panel is mixed with people that are veterans and people that are new, it can be something that you've experienced or something that you designed in another career. So don't feel like, oh, I'm not an ID yet. Just share those best practices that you've seen. And wait time is okay. We're all educators and training people are learning. So I'm not afraid of wait time.
I can add a bit of details. Actually, a different case. This one was on trying to train. How do you train entrepreneurship to students who are still in high school? So this project was actually happening in Rwanda, and I happened to be part of the team that was doing that. And it was quite interesting how the team was thinking about it. What I noticed that we did that was quite interesting was the fact that the course was designed. First of all, it was project based, so and then it was broken down into phases. So you have this phase, let's see the results, right? So for example, you need to raise capital. So how can you raise capital? And these were like questions tossed to the learners, and they were supposed to think about it in terms of, I can talk to my aunt, I can talk to my dad, and they can give, I can be able to get this and all that. And once you have that, then you move to the next phase. So now you need to get an expert who can teach you how to do this. Do you know someone who can help you, walk you through how to do this? So, and I thought breaking that into pieces really, okay, so it's still under implementation, so we don't really know the results yet. But while thinking about it in terms of breaking it down into phases and making them actionable in terms of, okay, get this point, so you can check that. And we actually did Google Forms whereby you could check the progress that you've made, how much have you raised, how much do you need, and you can work towards that. Then now, once you have that, then you take you to the next course. Now that you've gotten an expert, it's time for you to actually make the product. So we are working around making donuts and yogurt. So a group will work on one project, some students will work on one project, and the other will work on the other project. And they could easily, we walked you through in terms of the recipe, in terms of how to do it. then now you need to get an expert to actually help you. Now you have it. Now you need to sell it. Storing it is not valuable. So how can you sell this? So of course, within the training, there were some ideas of where you can sell it, and I think doing that, especially for their level, was really helpful. So they could be able to see the results. Oh, I need just to get one customer. That's it. Okay, I'm going to get a customer. Then okay, now you have one customer. So how do you become profitable? How do you store the financial records? So each phase was designed to deliver a certain level of skill, and once you're complete, it was easier, or I think it will be easier to go back to the first step and do it all again. Yeah, so I think that was a way in which we did it, and hope it might really give us the results we hope for.
Yeah, I really, really love that example because as phased learning, because it reminds me of that bicycle image that Julie had last time. So many training is information, new information, new information, then it's overload, right? But if it's a little bit of information, then that builds and is connected to the last part. And that's exactly what you're talking about. And even going into a little bit of chapter 9, right? Like having tracking for habits, right? So there's a tracking mechanism. They're able to add on to what they've already learned, and so when at the end of this, they really have learned by doing. I think sometimes, I know for me, I'm going to speak for me, sometimes we separate the doing from the learning. So we can even have this great conversation, read this great chapter, go back to our jobs and be like, all right, 10 information slides, little activity. And sometimes I guess that, is necessary depending, but it's just like, I think sometimes we're so scared to like make it a project based from the beginning, right? How do we make it about doing from the beginning with the information built in? All right. Aaron, you look like you were going to say something.
I'm kind of nodding my head on everything that's just been said, and I love and I can't remember which chapter it is. I think it's this week that we're talking about it. But if the thing is too big, make it smaller, right?
Yeah.
And I really love that. Or if it's too complex, and that's something that I'm just sort of stepping into, is like really complex situations. And if it's too much to remember or do in the time, make it smaller. And so I really love what Dixon said too, is that you get some kind of reward or concrete, um, you know, like this is the result of what you've done. And that is super motivating to the learner, and then helps you sort of keep moving. And so that consequence, I think, is keeping it smaller. And I just lost my train of thought. So I'm going to step out and just say that I really enjoyed that, and maybe it'll come back later.
Well, I'm going to not finish your thought, but hop on it. The consequence is making it smaller. I love that because though the real world application may be way off, making it smaller. And somebody mentioned even neurodivergent learners, right? If you want to make our learning more accessible, it's I don't have to wait an hour to the quiz at the end, right? I have very significant milestones. So I think that was a really good point, Aaron, for sure. Anyone else want to jump in?
I can jump in really quickly. Just in, you all are touching on so many great points, but just two main things for me is as a learner, in some of the courses that I'm going through now, I see how it's a lot of information overload, where it's just literally hours of people just talking versus people who talk and then break it up with a scenario based learning example where they reenact something, and then you get to hear kind of like the theory, and then you see it in action. It does make that connection and bring it together. But also to Dixon's earlier point with just having like that immediacy. So one of the examples in the book was, if you're teaching something about doing taxes, have them bring in their tax forms. So they're seeing and going along with it. So it's not just, an information dump, but they're processing it as they go along. And that was really effective as well. So not adult learners, but still the same in terms of effect, was when I used to teach ESL in the classroom, bringing RELIA into the classroom, like real life examples of something. It helps, again, the learner make that connection. So it's not this abstract thing. We all know what it is, but it's not here in front of us. I think, in terms of talking about like different disciplines of how we learn, and I know that's some people argue that that's not that hasn't been confirmed in terms of like the different learning styles, but I think people are very, very visual in terms of just making that I don't even know if it's, I guess it's sort of a visceral connection, but I think having a visual and having things that you can touch and process really helps with the learning. And I feel like I'm kind of on a going on and on here, but the last example I will give of that is something that really, I was fascinated by this. There's this video that has gone viral of this little Black girl who parents want her to wear a bonnet when she goes.
We lost you a little bit, Kenya. Parents want her to wear a bonnet. Kenya, I think we're losing you, but I really want to hear that example. So we're going to move on, but I really want to hear that example. So when we get you back, you may want to come out and come back in. I'm going to say, Kenya, give us that example. I don't care if we're on chapter 9, okay? So go ahead and get back out and come back in because we have your hands on your head right now. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next one. But I do want to hear that example. Dr. Cropper, did you have anything to say about this before we move forward?
Yes, actually, I coordinated a curriculum, leadership development curriculum for the Office of the Secretary of Defense in the U.S. and it was for mid-level civilian leaders, and we had about 16 competencies that we were supposed to have them practice, and we gave them role plays and scenarios and projects and hands-on activities, with decision making, team building, solving problems, all kinds of things. But I'm not sure how well we did at having them plan how they were going to apply these capabilities back on the job. But at the end, during it was a 9-month program, and it was about 20 days worth of training, and they actually visited sites around the world in Korea and Hawaii and different military sites, so they became familiar and they got training and orientation each place. But at the end, we had each participant create a leadership framework, which this leadership framework identified their vision, their mission, their principles, what they wanted to be as a leader, and then we did high speed coaching. there were 64 participants. I was one of the coaches, and there were 5 or 6 other coaches, and they only had 3 minutes to share this leadership framework, but it was transformational. I mean, it was just a transformational experience. They came in and, they'd taken all these things that they'd learned. They said, this is what I want to be as a leader. And then the facilitator back in the group of 64, he committed some of them to share their leadership frameworks with their managers, with their peers, and with their subordinates. So they're saying, this is the kind of leader I want to be. And so ultimately, if you can get people to, determine, okay, how am I going to apply these principles, back as a leader? And I think that's the key, is getting them to plan how they're going to perform.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that example that it was only 3 minutes, but it was so powerful for them it was so powerful for them to even share. And again, to plan their performance, right? That's really key. Help them to plan their performance. I think that that's really transformational, right? For those of us who are practitioners to really start thinking about that. Kenya's back. All right, Kenya, tell us your example about the little Black girl. Her mom wanted her to wear a bonnet. Go ahead.
Everything goes. So yeah, really quickly, I would offer the parents found this song putting on their bonnets and going to bed. And after that, the girl never. You could see it in her face as she was connected.
Okay, I actually got the bits and pieces of it. So, all right. I got the bits and pieces of it, so I'm going to reiterate it for Kenya, okay? So, little girl, her mom wanted her to wear a bonnet, which just kind of protects the hairstyle and, helps everything. And the girl was reluctant to wearing the bonnet, but her mom showed her a cartoon where she actually saw it modeled, right? Julie talks about modeling. Actually saw someone modeling it, and the girl never had a problem with putting on that bonnet again. So we see those examples. These are our natural examples. Hey, Kenya, these are our natural. I hope I recapped that just right. But these are our natural human examples, right? That we have in our life. I think, there's another there's another thing that says human-centered design, right? And a lot of times we're separating our learning experience design and our instructional design from just what humans want. That story that Kenya said about the little girl who just connected with that cartoon, that's not because she was a kid. That's because she was a human, and we respond to modeling, we respond to real world examples. So Kenya, even though we had some technical examples, please know that example was valuable. All right, we're going to go ahead to chapter 9. All right. All right, chapter 9 is here. All right, so we're talking about habits now, okay? So looking at the anatomy of a habit, how do we design to build habits? For those who probably haven't read the book, there's a couple of components. The larger definition that Julie uses is that a habit is when something becomes almost involuntary, right? You do it kind of without thinking about it, right? But she also said, but we can break down that definition even more. So when you think about a habit, it's related to motivation, it's related to the environment, it's related to triggers. And I just want to remind all our panelists to mute. It's related to our triggers. It's related to feedback. Are we getting immediate feedback? Or for instance, if the habit for environment is about flossing, Julie was saying, part of the environmental factors are, do you have a ready supply of floss? So, and there's other components of that anatomy of a habit that I'm missing. So how can we think of all of the components that make a habit, right? And how can we implement that in our design? And then the next question is, how do we give an elephant that wants immediacy, right, a well-worn path? Elephants, the elephant concept, are habits. They're creatures of habit, right? They're creatures of habit. So it's a well-worn path, but they need a well-worn path, something that they're used to, that they're familiar to, for it to stick. But so often our training that we're giving people, our training is about something new. So how do we give people a well-worn path, feeling like even though it's new, it's not completely disconnected from where they are now? How do we do that? And then how do we design for habit, number 3, when sometimes we can't follow up with the learners? All right, Julie talks a lot about following up with the learners, right? How do we design for habit knowing that we may not have access to the learners? And then the opposite, the flip side of that question is, for those who do have an opportunity to follow up with learners, how can this be achieved? All right, so you guys can take any of that on.
I might start at the top there a little bit and bring in one of the concepts that I read in this chapter that I really, really liked and that I've seen done really well. And that's when I was a learner. And so that was I'm just looking at my notes over here, the implementation intentions. I loved this. I love this so much. And I think this is such an important part of, designing to build habits. And so that was the phrase of, if this thing happens, I will do this thing. And that's grabbing onto the trigger, then looking at the habit. And so a course that I took called Leading Complex Projects by IDOU did this beautifully. And, the context of the course is projects are murky places. And so when you identify that you're in a murky space and having kind of an emotional response to it, what do you do? Because quite often we're in that sort of more reactive. And so the trigger is, and the sentence they would give us is that when I feel this, I will do this, or instead of doing what I usually do, I will do something new. And so they inserted an extra piece into that. When this happens, instead of doing what I normally do, I will now do this. And that has been that's really stuck in my mind. And I think it's so important. So I'd really like to encourage people to try building that. I haven't actually used it yet in my, building training, but I'd like to.
Yeah, and I love that because it's about intentionality for sure. And I think that that's really important. Does anybody else want to take that on?
Just a couple of comments. Linda just mentioned this book in the text. I don't know if I can. Oh, this doesn't want to show up. So the Atomic Habits book by James Clear. I just got it. I haven't read it yet, but I I think the key, and Aaron was talking about this. I think the key is identifying and prioritizing the habits and the behavior that we want and need, and then using the different techniques. There's some amazing techniques in this chapter and probably in this new book. Uh, Using those techniques to develop the habits, and uh, Covey, Stephen R. Covey said that if you practice a behavior for 21 days, it becomes a habit. And so I think building in that, like Aaron was saying, building in that plan, building in saying, okay, trigger response when, when, to do this, when I come into the situation, I need to do such and so and so, and then building in a plan. But I think the biggest challenge is identifying the behaviors and prioritizing the behaviors that we want, and then coming up with a plan.
Yeah, starting with the end in mind, right? What are the behaviors? Again, so many times we start with the information in mind. And that's where we are all kind of, if we're still doing that, that's where we struggle and that's where we deliver training that's ineffective. We really need to start with what are the gaps, what are the behaviors, like what's the end result of this. So I think that that's very crucial. Anyone else want to chime in? All right, I'll chime in. One of the things I was thinking about, this is kind of going back to the last chapter, but I think it works for habits as well. We talked about kind of that visceral image, right, that we need to give. And this, what I'm about to say, is more kind of technical about what we all can do. And I just want to remind all our panelists to mute. So it's really technical about what we all can do in this space as far as our own practice and growing our practice. We don't have to become graphic designers, but I do think that understanding, I was just thinking this as I read the book, is not something that Julie necessarily suggests, but I was like, if I want to be better at visceral images, or if I want to be better at connecting to the elephant, so much training, it's just stick a cartoon in there that's dressed up in professional dress going like this, you know? And there was a training at my job that we revamped because where I work, we think about that often. And they revamped it because every single slide was one woman who works in the department going like this, and just taking up so much real estate and so much space on it. And there was no reason why lovely woman, but there was no reason why her picture on each slide was contributing to the information that was learning. And so I was just thinking, if I want to get better at this practically, I want to start really getting myself immersed in some design principles, like visual design principles that really help them connect to the information to even kind of help facilitate that habit forming process. So that's kind of more technical, but I was just thinking about how it's more serious than I think a lot of us put stock into.
That's actually something that I just learned about in one of my courses, and it's referred to as reducing extraneous cognitive load, where it's like all of these different distractions essentially that prevents the learner from getting to that skill or information or whatever that making that connection with the learning, that, yeah, like you said, is a distraction, and it's something that we ourselves as learners have to be aware of, and then not let that get in the way of our learning. But it's also important as designers to not create that obstacle for someone to have to get over. So that's a great point, and I think that's why UX design is such a huge. It's one of those like adjacent skills that really contribute to instructional design, UX design, as well as project management. I've been hearing a lot about that, how those two are really essential in helping instructional designers improve their course creations, there was something, along the lines of the extraneous cognitive load. I don't know if this is if this is part of that, or if it's more the intrinsic cognitive load. But even thinking about sometimes what the learners are thinking or are going through just to arrive at the point where they can connect to learn. I'll give a really bad or good example of making smoothies for myself. I am very kitchen lazy. I do not enjoy cooking. I like it quick and fast. And so in my journey of trying to really create better eating habits, making healthy eating a lifestyle and not just, these like 30-day challenges that I quit as soon as I'm done with the challenge, which defeats the purpose, because it's, again, trying to build habit. But one of the hurdles, like the mental hurdles that I have to get over is that it's complicated. Eating healthy is complicated, and making a smoothie is too many choices. What do I put in it? How do I make sure? Does it taste good? And on one of the challenges that I was on, it I don't know why, but this particular, it wasn't the first time that I had made a smoothie during a challenge, but this one just really opened my eyes. It's like, oh, a few scoops of these frozen fruit, a few scoops of, this powder or that, and a few handfuls of some greens, and boom, you have yourself a healthy smoothie. So sometimes it's that background noise that's already in our heads, that if we can try to get inside that through the analysis or whatever we do in preparing for the course creation, to try to meet them where they are. Again, it goes back to them seeing themselves in the lesson and then bridging that gap of I think it would touch on a lot of different gaps that it bridges. Yeah.
I really love that because it goes back to metacognition, right? And realizing like, oh, it's not really that hard to prepare this smoothie, right? Or to do this new process, or learn this new software. It's really everything I already believe about it. And it takes me to her example of Carol Dweck, who was kind of like, the mother of growth mindset, who gave those students the test, and those who were said, you have to be smart to do this, or you're really smart, they struggled with actually doing hard tasks. But the ones that were like, you have to work hard to do this, they were like, we want the challenging task because we see that we can get there. And when we're talking to adult learners, I think a lot of times we're afraid to just say, this is difficult, this is hard, change is hard. But but here's how we're mapping this course out. Here's how we're mapping this training out. Like, I think if employees who are receiving training are talked to as adults, like, I know a lot of you, some of you guys have been working with this system for 20 years, and changing is going to be difficult. So we've made sure in this training today, if you're doing an ILT, if you're doing it live, that we're going to start here and just helping them say, all right, it is difficult, but they've already thought about the fact that it's difficult for me. And now this is going to be value added. Anyone else want to chime in?
I've actually got a live example of that I'm working on right now, which is kind of interesting. And thanks for bringing that up. And it's technology. So it's employees using really complex technology that they didn't have really good training on in the first place, that I'm trying to fix. And when I interviewed them, they've all come up with their own solutions, but because they're all independent solutions, it's creating friction down the line. And I was like, but this is not a bad thing. What we need to do is get you all together in the same room and come up with a singular solution that you all buy into. Because if you just tell that to the training person and they're like, here's your job aid, no one's going to use it because they've got their elephant, right? Is like chug along, doing the thing that they've been doing the whole time. But if they come up with their own solution, the buy-in is already, they're like, oh yeah, look, this is better. And they've done it together. So I think that's how I'm going to do that training.
Yay, look at us helping to collaborate in the real world. That's awesome. I do. It's not as like you're going to get it done in 2 weeks, but I would love to hear your progress going forward. I think that'd be awesome for us to kind of see. Anyone else want to chime in? Dr. Cropper or
Yeah,
Dick?
just a comment. Sarah Rawls made a really good comment about the, breaking. Basically, she was talking about second language acquisition, and I know we have a few experts here in second language acquisition, and I actually have a master's minor in Spanish teaching myself. And but the point is, it takes a lot of practice with the individual components to build up, competency to put simple sentences and more complex sentences together, especially grammatically correct. But what I really like is it's not just the practice, and we've been talking about some of these things, but at the end of the chapter 9, um, Julie summarizes some of the points, and these are the points. Have learners create implementation intentions, like Aaron was talking about. Introduce the habit and allow learners to brainstorm solutions so they own the solution. Carve out time for specific habits. Reduce the barriers. That's what Kenya was talking about. Create rubrics or tracking mechanisms, so self follow up. Help tie the habit to an existing behavior so it's easy to do. Hack the environment, fix the environment, right? And then identify the triggers. And so a combination of these, and then of course there are probably some other really great points in this new book, The Atomic Habits. But the point is if you combine these, then you, and especially if you prioritize the behaviors and habits. I really like the project manager example at the beginning. The one project manager knew how to manage people and manage projects and manage meetings, and if you take those behaviors and then build those in, then it makes life a lot easier.
Absolutely.
Just to piggyback really quickly on Dr. Crawford's example of the two project managers, I have recently become not so great at, but obsessed with systems. And I think when you in that particular case, when you string a bunch of habits together, then you create these systems that work for you and make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Especially when you
Yeah.
think about it, the systemic approach. Go ahead, Dixon.
I just wanted to add something again around the environment, and this was quite interesting. So the startup I work with, we have this problem where customer would raise tickets, support tickets, just even for the simplest things, and sometimes even that the material, the instruction material, support material is available. So what the support team will just do will be, take a link and just forward it back to. So I was having a conversation with someone, and he gave me an interesting solution how they did it, and I think it's about fixing the environment. But then what they did is they made it difficult to raise support tickets. So which was very interesting. So what they did was, instead of just getting the number had to be routed to a different country. Then now so it was really a nightmare to get support. So the help is there, but we are making it difficult for you. So that forced most of their customers to actually make sure they go through the material, because it's a headache getting there. I don't know. It's quite interesting. I don't know how many unhappy customers they had, but we're curious to see how that can work in our end as well. So I think there are different ways in which you can treat the environment, and sometimes might be, and I think this has also worked. I remember there's when I was trying to study, someone was telling me, if you really want to focus, you need to change your environment. And when I was actually doing that and putting my positioning differently, it changed also how I used to focus. So I think also trying to remove those distractions, or trying to remove those easy ways of raising support, might be actually the solution to having most of the customers using the support. Yeah, I know it's sort of out, but yeah, I thought I should share it.
I think that's hilarious. I'm pretty sure that our different work environments will like our stakeholders would have different opinions about it. But I think that there's a really good point in there. And I used to be very tough on my students when I was in K-12. So part of me is just like, I like it, but I understand that it's not practical in every instance. But one of the things I do like about it is making the training attractive, right? More attractive than the way of not learning it. And I think that that's the crux of what we learn from that. That's so interesting. And I also think about micro learning, and there's not much time to talk about it. I'm looking at my notes, but I think micro learning has a really good opportunity here. We could talk about it, maybe next week, to really help us with some of these things. Again, this, whenever I mention a solution, I'm not saying that's the end all be all, but it really is good for that kind of like step by step. You don't have to do it all in one day. And so I really think that that's something we should talk about. And I want to give an example from my workplace. I know it's one, so we're going to end soon. This goes so quickly, but at my job, everyone's talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's sort of a big concept, right? Because it's not as easily trackable as are you using the software correctly. It's about shift in culture, so it takes a lot more to really implement it. And I have to give the people at my job like such, I wasn't a part of the project directly, but they created a whole system where people they can earn at the end an inclusive hiring badge. So like you're a person who understands this, but you don't just get to the badge very easily. There are webinars that you have to watch and respond to. There are live trainings you have to respond to. There are articles and things that you have to write. I mean, and you get to choose. So there's a lot of choice. You don't just have to like just do this. There's like a list of if I get permission from my bosses, it's a public site, but if I get permission, I'll actually share it next week. But there is like so many things that you have to do. It feels like an obstacle course, but it's not a negative thing. It's like you get to choose your path of learning to earn this badge. And it takes a lot of time investment, but by the end of it, you're not just reading why this is good policy. You're actually experiencing why this is good for the shifted culture. So when you see somebody who's earned that badge, you're going to know that they didn't just earn that badge by sitting through a 3-hour training about why you should be kind to people. Like they've actually learned the history and they're willing to put into practice. They even have to prove that they put it into practice. And it is a long form thing. And it's an amazing feat. So if I get permission, I will put that in the chat next week because I'm amazed at what they were able to come up with. All right. And Erin, I know when Erin does this, she's thinking. So Erin Erin, do you have anything to add?
No, I want to look at your program that you were just talking about. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I
I
would
like the
definitely. Go ahead.
choice. Like you have to have choice and you have to do something and show it, and then you get your badge. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Any last thoughts? I know every week we could go on for another hour. Thank you. Well, let me first thank the people that actually come every week and our new people. Thank you for being with us. I hope that it's valuable for you. I always want to say that this is for our learning. It's a great book, but also there's a networking tab, right? So connect with people. One of the things that warms my heart is week to week, people will say, "Hey, so and so, it's good to see you again." And I'm like, they met here and now they're like friends. So please do that. If someone in the chat today or on the panel had really good ideas, feel free to endorse them for a skill or even recommendations. We can all help each other sort of kind of elevate our presence here on LinkedIn. So it's really about a mutual benefit for all of us that are here. All right. Any last thoughts that we want to leave anyone with today? Anyone? Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of truly a global community. That's what this is. So thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Bye, everyone.